The table didn't break. The floorboards did. And 400 people sat frozen in that hall, because what they had just watched wasn't a wrestling hold or a punch. It was a lesson, the kind that shows the biggest man in the room exactly how far size can carry him, without a single blow ever being thrown in anger. This is the story of that night. It was the early 1970s. The venue was a large sports arena in a major western city, host every year to an international exhibition of strength and combat sports. Roughly 400 spectators filled the seats, journalists, athletes, and ordinary fans who had come for one simple reason: to see who would end up on the mat tonight. The air was thick with sweat, stage heat, and the low murmur of an impatient crowd. Outside, the city carried on with its usual indifference, traffic moving, neon signs flickering to life as the evening deepened, entirely unaware of what was about to unfold inside this one building. This particular evening was not going to be an ordinary one. A challenge was about to be issued that wasn't on any program, born out of pride and provoked in front of everyone. The program that night had already run long. Weightlifters had come and gone. A pair of boxers had traded a few exhibition rounds. A strongman had bent steel bars to warm applause. And now the crowd's attention belonged entirely to the final act, the man everyone had actually come to see. Victor Kruger, 6'4", 260 pounds, a name in the wrestling world that no one dared challenge lightly. Undefeated for 7 straight years, with more than 200 wins to his name, most of them ending before the first round was even over. His arms looked like tree trunks. His neck seemed carved from stone, scars traced across his knuckles, evidence of a lifetime spent testing his body against other bodies. They called him the Mountain, and it wasn't an exaggeration. He'd spent every day of his life building that mass. As a boy, he'd hauled loads across his family's fields, wrestled older cousins twice his size, just to prove he could. Later, he stepped into proper wrestling rings, and before long, became one of the most feared grapplers on the circuit, a man whose reputation walked into a room before he did. His philosophy was simple, and he never tired of repeating it. The bigger man always wins. Tonight, he had every reason to believe it once again. Minutes earlier, he'd flattened yet another challenger in under a minute. And now, microphone in hand, sweat still glistening on his shoulders, he was basking in the applause. It was in the middle of that celebration, scanning the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who has never once doubted himself, that his eyes landed on a slight, plainly dressed figure sitting near the front of the hall. His name was Bruce, 5'7", barely 135 pounds. From a distance, he looked like nothing more than another spectator. Black trousers, a plain white shirt, no jewelry, no team colors, nothing that marked him as anyone in particular. What set him apart, if you looked closely enough, was a stillness in his eyes that took a moment to notice, and longer to understand. He wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't part of the crowd's noise, or the running commentary happening in the rows around him. He was simply watching, the way a teacher watches a student sit an exam, attentive, patient, already anticipating where the mistakes would come from. Beside him sat a student of his own, a young man who had trained under him for several years, and who was now shifting uneasily in his seat. Even he could feel that something was building in the air, the way a change in weather announces itself before the first drop of rain. Kruger leaned into the microphone, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "I've never let anyone off easy. Nobody, no matter what style they claim to fight in, has ever lasted 2 minutes in front of me. All this talk about Eastern martial arts people go on about, dance moves, movie tricks, useless against real strength." The hall went quiet. A few heads turned. The words were aimed, unmistakably, at the very man who had recently become known through his films and public demonstrations, a man whose growing reputation for speed and precision had started to reach even audiences who had never set foot in a dojo. Kruger pressed on, enjoying the tension he was building. "Is there anyone here brave enough to face me? Any so-called martial arts master? Come on, prove it. Or is it just talk, like everything else people say about these little styles?" Bruce said nothing at first. He simply rose from his seat. There was no urgency in the motion, no anger, just a decision quietly made, the way a man stands up when he's finished reading a page and is ready to turn to the next one. His student caught his sleeve. "You don't have to do this. He's twice your size. This isn't your fight." Bruce smiled, the same calm smile he wore through most of life's provocations. He issued the challenge in front of everyone in this hall. If I stay silent, my silence becomes an answer too. And it would be the wrong one. Sometimes silence teaches the wrong lesson. He began walking toward the stage, unhurried, each step deliberate. Whispers rippled through the crowd as heads turned to track him. Who is that? So small, next to that mountain of a man. Some people laughed outright. Others shook their heads, as if watching someone walk knowingly into disaster, already composing in their minds how they described the coming embarrassment to their friends tomorrow. Kruger watched him approach and burst out laughing, a big, booming sound that carried to the back rows. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" he said to the men beside him, not bothering to lower his voice. "This guy looks lighter than one of my arms. Did someone send a boy up here by mistake?" Bruce reached the stage, climbed the 2 short steps without hesitation, and stood squarely in front of him. Up close, the difference in size was even more striking. Kruger seemed to tower over him by nearly a foot, outweighing him by more than 100 pounds. And yet Bruce's voice, when it came, was calm and even, carrying easily across the now silent hall. "You issued a challenge. I accept it." Dead silence fell over the crowd. The organizers, seated at their table near the ring, exchanged worried looks. This wasn't part of the program, and to mismatch the severe carried obvious risk. But the crowd was now fully locked in, leaning forward in their seats, and there was no walking it back without disappointing 400 people who smelled a story in the making. After a brief, hurried conference among the organizers, a decision was reached. This would be treated as a demonstration, not a formal, sanctioned match. A referee stepped into the ring, a stocky man with decades of officiating behind him, and laid out the terms in a clear, practiced voice. 3 minutes. No intent to cause serious injury. Simply an exhibition of 2 very different approaches to combat for the education and entertainment of everyone watching. Kruger nodded impatiently, already settling into his usual wrestling stance, feet wide, hands forward, weight planted like a wall rooted into the floor. It was the stance of a man who had never needed a second approach, because the first had always been enough. Bruce took no formal stance at all. He simply stood, arms loose at his sides, breathing normally, eyes fixed on Kruger. No fear in them, no arrogance either. Just complete, unwavering attention, the kind that misses nothing. Someone in the crowd murmured to their neighbor, "He's not even in a fighting position. This is going to be over in seconds." A few people around them nodded in agreement, already reaching for their coats, assuming the show would be brief, and the real entertainment of the evening was already behind them. Everyone in that hall that night would later tell the story a little differently. The details would shift with retelling, as they always do. But on one point, every account would agree. 400 witnesses, a match that lasted less than 3 minutes, and an outcome nobody in that building had predicted. Not even the man standing quietly in the middle of the ring. The referee raised his hand, glanced at both men to confirm they were ready, and signaled the start. Kruger attacked first, straight ahead, full weight behind it, arms spread wide, trying to close the distance and lock Bruce into a grip before he could react. It was the same move that had put hundreds of opponents on the mat before him, a technique so practiced it required no conscious thought at all. Bruce wasn't there when the arms arrived. He'd moved just enough, one step forward, slightly off the center line, closing distance rather than retreating from it, and Kruger's arms closed around empty air. His momentum carried him forward, his balance tipping for a split second before he caught himself. A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd, a low collective murmur. No one had ever seen Kruger's opening attack miss so completely, so cleanly, without even the appearance of a struggle. He recovered instantly, spun around, and came again. A fast jab, then another, testing, probing for an opening. Bruce slipped both with the smallest movement of his head and shoulders, without stepping back even once, without his feet ever leaving the small patch of stage he'd claimed at the start. He stayed exactly where he was, simply angling his body a few degrees at a time, the way water bends around a stone without ever losing its shape or its forward motion. 15 seconds in, Kruger had thrown a dozen techniques, punches, a grab, a shoulder charge. None had landed cleanly. Bruce had not thrown a single strike in return. He was reading, not attacking, studying the rhythm of a man who had never before needed to develop more than one rhythm. Kruger's breathing quickened, not from exhaustion, but from confusion, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who had spent 7 years never once feeling outmatched. He was facing an opponent who wasn't attacking and wasn't retreating, only quietly, almost politely, neutralizing everything he threw, as though each technique were a question that had already been answered before it was asked. He made one last, all-out attempt, a full power bear hug, both arms flung wide, every ounce of his 260 pounds committed to the motion. It was the move that had never once failed him in 200 matches. The instant it landed on anyone, the match was effectively over. Nothing could be done once those arms closed. This time Bruce didn't step away. He touched Kruger's wrist lightly with his left hand, redirected it just slightly off its line, and planted his foot behind Kruger's lead leg. At the exact instant Kruger's entire committed weight was resting on it. At the one moment in the entire sequence when the big man's structure was most vulnerable. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't a display of force. Just a small, precisely timed nudge, delivered in exactly the right place, at exactly the right fraction of a second. And the mountain went down. 260 pounds of a man who had never once hit the mat in 7 years crashed onto the stage floor. The impact was loud enough that people in the front rows felt the vibration travel up through the boards beneath their own feet. A folding chair near the edge of the stage toppled over from the force of it. For 4 full seconds, no one in the hall made a sound. No one breathed. 400 people who had come expecting a lopsided, predictable spectacle, a giant crushing of curiosity, had just witnessed something entirely different, something they would need time to make sense of, something that didn't fit neatly into any category they already understood. Kruger lay on the floor, working to catch his breath, staring up at the lights above the stage. The wound wasn't physical, it was to his pride. 7 years of an unbeaten record had just been undone, in front of everyone he knew, and hundreds he didn't, in a single motion, without a single blow ever landing against him. Bruce stood exactly where he'd been standing throughout, in the same small patch of stage. His breathing was unchanged, his expression as calm as it had been at the start of the match. He showed no celebration, no clenched fist raised in triumph, no glance toward the crowd to gauge their reaction. He simply walked the short distance to where Kruger lay and extended a hand. Kruger stared at that hand for a moment, propped up on one elbow, chest still heaving. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only confusion, and perhaps, buried somewhere beneath it, something like respect. He reached up and took it, and Bruce helped pull him to his feet with a steadiness that seemed to belong to a much larger man. Kruger stood, brushed the dust from his shoulders, and said, his voice quieter than it had been all evening, "I've never felt like someone understood more than me. You never even touched me. Not once did I feel a real strike." "I didn't fight your strength," Bruce replied. "I only redirected it. Strength itself is never the problem, but strength used without understanding will eventually turn against the person wielding it. Your own weight did most of what happened here tonight. I simply removed what was holding it up." Kruger lowered his head, something in his posture softening. "I thought size was everything. I built this body to be the answer to every question anyone could ask me. Size is a tool," Bruce said. "Understanding is what tells you how to use it. You have real, tremendous power. I felt it the moment you moved. Pair that power with technique and balance, and no one will be able to stand against you. Right now you have half of what you need. Tonight you found out which half was missing." The hall finally exhaled, and a wave of applause rolled through it. Not for a winner, not against a loser, but for what everyone had just witnessed together. People rose to their feet, one section at a time, until the whole arena was standing. Others turned to each other, talking over one another, still not quite believing what they'd seen, already trying to describe it in words that felt inadequate. The organizers hurried onto the stage, caught somewhere between confusion and excitement, aware that whatever else happened at the exhibition that night, this was the moment people would remember. One of them grabbed the microphone, his voice slightly unsteady. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just saw was the real main event of the night." After the match, as the crowd slowly began filing toward the exits, Kruger asked Bruce to stay a while longer. The two men sat together at the edge of the stage, the noise of the emptying hall fading around them, until it was just the two of them and a handful of stagehands coiling cables in the background. "Teach me," Kruger said, turning the words over as though he'd never said anything quite like them before. "My whole life I believed in strength. Tonight I learned that strength alone isn't enough, and I don't know what to do with that." Bruce thought for a moment before answering. Strength and technique aren't enemies. They're incomplete without each other. Your body is the product of years of hard work. None of that is wasted, and none of it needs to be undone. It just needs a new direction, a new set of eyes to guide it. Kruger asked, "And if I had got my grip on you? If the hold had landed the way it always does?" Bruce smiled. "Then I would have learned something important about myself, and about you. That's exactly why we accept challenges like this one. Not to prove that we're better than someone else, but to find out what we don't yet know. Tonight I learned things about your strength that I couldn't have learned any other way. You gave me that, even though you didn't mean to." Kruger managed a short, surprised laugh at that, the first sound of real humor he'd made since hitting the floor. "You're thanking me? I came up here to embarrass you in front of the whole city." "And instead we both learned something," Bruce said. "That's a better outcome than either of us expected when the night began." In the months that followed, Kruger changed the way he trained. Alongside the raw strength that had always defined him, he began working on balance, speed, and body awareness, concepts that had never seriously entered his training before, dismissed as unnecessary for a man his size. His coaches noticed a change first. A wrestler who used to simply overpower his way through every exchange had started reading his opponents, waiting for openings instead of forcing them. Opponents began to notice too. His game had become more dangerous than ever, not just because of his power, which remained fully intact, but because of his new understanding of how and when to use it. Wins that used to take him 30 seconds of brute effort now sometimes took 10, because he no longer needed to force what he could simply set up correctly. Whenever he was asked about that night, and he was asked often, as the story spread far beyond the arena where it happened, he gave the same answer, nearly word for word each time. "Everything I thought I'd learned in 7 years changed in a single moment that evening. I learned that the most dangerous opponent isn't the strongest man in the room. It's the one who believes he already is, because that belief is the only thing that can never be corrected from the inside." And Bruce, for his part, told the story to his own students in a different light, not as a tale of victory over a bigger man, but as a reminder woven into his broader teaching. Size was never a measure of true strength. Real power comes from understanding, not from mass. Never mistake the size of an opponent for the size of the threat they actually pose, and never mistake your own size for a guarantee of anything at all. That night, in the hall where a mountain fell, everyone who was there carried away the same lesson, even if they couldn't all put it into the same words. Real mastery doesn't announce itself with noise. It doesn't need a microphone, or a boast, or 200 consecutive wins to validate it. It works quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, and it only shows itself fully when it's truly needed, in the exact instant that matters, and not one moment before. Word of that night didn't stay inside the walls of the arena for long. By the following morning, versions of a story were already circulating through gyms and training halls across the city, each retelling a little more dramatic than the last. In one version, Kruger had been knocked unconscious. In another, the match had lasted a full round instead of a matter of seconds. Sports columnists who hadn't even been present wrote breathless accounts based on second-hand descriptions, eager to capitalize on a story that seemed too good to leave alone. The people who had actually been there, the 400 who sat in those seats, found themselves correcting the exaggerations again and again, though the corrections rarely traveled as far or as fast as the myths. What they insisted on, every time, was the one detail that mattered most. There had been no trickery, no theatrics, nothing staged about it. Just a smaller man reading a larger one with total clarity, and doing exactly what the moment required. Nothing more, nothing less. Reporters tried repeatedly to get a formal interview out of Bruce in the days that followed. Most were turned away politely. The few who succeeded found him reluctant to dwell on the specifics of the match itself. He would answer questions about training, about philosophy, about the years of work that had gone into that single evening. But when pressed for a blow-by-blow account of Kruger's fall, he would usually smile and change the subject. The story isn't really about a wrestler losing his balance, he told one persistent journalist. It's about what happens when you finally see clearly. That part doesn't make for very exciting headlines, but it's the only part that matters. Kruger did not fade from competition after that night, as some had predicted he might, humiliated into retirement. If anything, the opposite happened. He returned to the ring 3 weeks later, in a match that drew an even larger crowd than usual. People came, this time, not only to see him wrestle, but to see whether the loss of his aura had changed anything about the man underneath it. What they found was someone different in ways that were hard to name at first. He moved with the same raw power as always, but there was a new patience to him, a willingness to wait for the right opening instead of simply forcing one into existence. He won that match, and the one after it, and the one after that. But the wins looked different now, more deliberate, less like an avalanche, and more like a well-placed key turning in a lock. He never sought out Bruce again for a rematch, and Bruce never offered one. Both men seemed to understand, without needing to discuss it, that the value of what had happened lay precisely in its not being repeated. A single lesson, delivered once, cleanly, was worth more than any number of attempts to relive it. Years later, when younger wrestlers asked Kruger about the secret behind his late-career transformation, the shift that had turned an already formidable champion into something sharper, more precise, harder to prepare for, he rarely gave them the full story right away. He would usually just tell them to picture the biggest, strongest person they knew, and then ask them what would happen if that person met someone who understood exactly how their strength worked, and exactly how to make it work against them. Only when they pressed further would he tell them about the night a much smaller man had let his own momentum do all the work, and how 4 seconds of silence in a crowded hall had taught him more than 7 years of victories ever had. He always ended the story the same way, tapping 2 fingers against his own chest, just below the collarbone. "Size gets you into the room," he'd say. "Understanding is what keeps you standing once you're in it." The end. The table didn't break. The floorboards did, and 400 people sat frozen in that hall, because what they had just watched wasn't a wrestling hold or a punch. It was a lesson, the kind that shows the biggest man in the room exactly how far size can carry him, without a single blow ever being thrown in anger.